Karen, the self-appointed HOA queen, thought she could humiliate my wife by reporting her for pretending to be a federal officer. But when my wife pulled out her real badge, Karen's face turned whiter than her picket fence, and the fallout changed our entire neighborhood forever. We were barely a week into our new home when the trouble started, and it came wrapped in pearls, perfume, and an attitude as stiff as starched linen. My wife Leah and I had finally moved into a suburban neighborhood that, on paper, seemed like a dream. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, friendly smiles from joggers in the morning, everything you'd expect in one of those peaceful HOA communities where nothing big ever really happens. That's what we were going for, honestly. We both had high-stress jobs, and we wanted peace more than anything. A place to breathe. Leah had just transferred from her previous federal field division to a new assignment based out of the state capital, which meant shorter travel and fewer out-of-state missions. That also meant we could finally live a bit more like a regular couple. We'd spent years in short-term rentals and undergo living, and this house was supposed to be our first real taste of stability. It had a small front porch, a fenced backyard, and an extra room Leah wanted to turn into her reading nook. It felt like a real home, and that feeling lasted exactly for days. The first time we saw her, Karen, though we didn't know her name yet, she was walking her tiny dog down the sidewalk across the street. Her whole body moved like she was inspecting something. Eyes squinted, posture upright, footsteps measured. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Just gave us a long look like she was mentally evaluating our worth. I was unloading some boxes from the truck while Leah carried a toolbox toward the garage. Karen stopped at the edge of her yard and called out, "Are you the new owners?" "Yes, we are," I said politely. "Just got the keys Monday." She nodded, but not in a welcoming way, more like a confirmation. Then she said something that stuck with me. "Well, I hope you read the HOA rulebook. This community runs on order." And then she turned and walked away, heels tapping the pavement like a judge leaving the courtroom. I remember looking at Leah and raising my eyebrows. "Nice, welcome. She'll be back," Leah said with a smirk, and she was right. Karen came by again the very next morning. We were setting up our patio furniture when she appeared at the edge of our lawn, arms folded, holding a clipboard. She didn't introduce herself, didn't even mention her name. Instead, she pointed at the curb. "Your trash bins are too far from the street. They should be exactly 12 inches from the curb, not more." Leah blinked. "You measured our trash bins?" "I measure everything. It's how this neighborhood stays beautiful." She said it like she was doing us a favor. "Also, your grass looks like it's half an inch too high. I'd recommend cutting it before Saturday." I thanked her in the driest tone I could manage and wheeled the bins back a few inches. Leah stayed quiet, watching Karen with the same calm expression she used in tense meetings with high-level government officials. She didn't react, she didn't escalate, but I could tell she was filing Karen's behavior away in her mind like evidence in a case. Over the next several days, Karen made herself a regular presence. She walked her dog past our house no fewer than 4 times a day and always found something to comment on. "Your welcome mat isn't HOA approved. That flag in your yard, are you aware of the size restrictions? Your garage door, it has a small dent that's not up to community standard." It became almost laughable, except for the fact that it was clearly targeted. She wasn't doing this to the other neighbors. I watched her stroll past other homes without so much as a glance, but with us, it was like we were under surveillance. Still, Leah never let it get under her skin. Bullies don't like silence. She told me one night while sipping tea on the porch, "If you don't feed their fire, they burn themselves out." One particular afternoon, everything changed. Leah had just come home from a field visit. She still wore her black utility pants and sturdy tactical boots, her hair tied back neatly. She wasn't in her full uniform. Her agency didn't require one for certain tasks, but she definitely looked official. She had her federal ID clipped to her belt, partially visible under her jacket, and she was carrying a case of files and gear from her SUV. She barely got 2 steps onto the lawn before Karen spotted her. Karen froze on the sidewalk, glaring like she'd just caught a fugitive. "Excuse me," she shouted. "What is that outfit?" Leah turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. "I'm sorry." That Karen pointed at her clothes and badge, "That little get-up. Is it Halloween already? You know impersonating an officer is a federal crime, right?" I heard it from the garage and came outside just in time to catch Leah's expression shift from amused to stone-cold. Not angry, not shocked, just perfectly blank. The kind of face she used when someone said something ignorant in a boardroom and didn't deserve the dignity of a response. "I'm coming from work," Leah said calmly. Karen scoffed. "Oh please, I've lived here for 12 years. I know every real officer in this town. What agency are you pretending to be with?" "FBI, DI, Homeland Security." Leah didn't answer. She just walked past Karen and into the house. Karen stood there fuming, phone in hand, probably looking up federal impersonation laws. I could feel the storm building. I asked Leah later if she wanted to report the harassment, but she just shrugged and said, "Let her dig her own hole." 2 days later, she did. That morning started like any other. Leah had left early for a strategy meeting, and I was working from home. Around noon, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, 2 uniformed police officers stood there, looking serious. "Afternoon, sir. Is Leah Grant here?" "She's at work," I replied, suddenly alert. "Can I ask what this is about?" The taller officer cleared his throat. "We received a report from a resident stating that someone at this address may be impersonating a federal officer." I stared at them, stunned. "You're kidding me." "No, sir. We just need to verify credentials. Nothing serious, just a routine check, of course." Karen had actually called the police on my wife. She really believed Leah was faking her job. I called Leah, who was already on her way back home. She arrived 10 minutes later, stepped out of the car, and walked straight up to the officers. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly. "You wanted to see my credentials." She opened the case she kept secured in her vehicle. Inside were her federal badge, official ID, and agency documents. She handed them over professionally, explaining her role and jurisdiction. The officers took a few minutes to check everything, nodding slowly as they realized who she really was. Their tone changed immediately. One even looked a little embarrassed. "Ma'am, we appreciate your cooperation. Everything's in order." "Sorry for the inconvenience," Leah smiled politely. "No trouble at all. I assume the call came from a neighbor." The officers exchanged a glance and nodded. "She's known to be overly cautious." "That's one way to put it," Leah said with a chuckle. As they left, I stood next to her on the porch. We both watched Karen peering from behind her curtain across the street. Leah didn't say a word. She didn't wave, just stood there, still as stone, badge gleaming in the sunlight. And for the first time since we moved in, Karen shut the curtains without saying a thing. The air in the neighborhood felt different after that day. It wasn't just quieter, it was still, like the silence that hangs in the sky just before a storm cracks it wide open. Karen hadn't come out of her house once since the police left. Our driveway, not a single trash bin violation. Not a peep about our mailbox design, and certainly no more accusations about Leah's job. It was strange, for someone who treated the HOA rulebook like a holy document. Karen had suddenly disappeared from the enforcement committee she claimed to represent so boldly that at first we thought she was just embarrassed, and honestly, who wouldn't be? She'd accused a real federal officer of impersonation, called the police, and got publicly corrected, all while the neighbors watched from their windows. I figured she'd slink back for a bit, lick her wounds, and maybe learn a thing or two about minding her business. But something about Karen's silence didn't feel like retreat. It felt like regrouping. Leah, however, didn't seem fazed at, or, if anything, she looked more relaxed. Her posture loosened up, her voice softened, and she even spent more time on the porch after work, sipping tea and reading. It was her way of taking her ground back, not by fighting, but by existing freely where she had every right to. "If she wants a war, she's in the wrong battlefield," Leah said one evening, "because I don't fight with noise, I win with facts." But peace didn't last long. Exactly 1 week after the police visit, a thick envelope appeared in our mailbox. It wasn't addressed from any government office or legal body. It came from the local HOA board, more specifically, the Compliance Oversight Committee, whatever that meant. Inside was a printed letter accusing us of violating multiple community regulations, where we're being formally warned for the following: improper vehicle parking, use of a non-approved security camera, having excessively large decorative items in our front yard, and aggressive behavior toward neighbors. I laughed out loud when I read it. Leah didn't. "This is her," she said immediately. She couldn't prove I was fake, so now she's using the HOA as her new badge. Each complaint was vague and clearly targeted. The improper parking referred to the time Leah's SUV was temporarily parked on the grass for 10 minutes. While we cleared out the garage, the security camera was a standard Ring doorbell installed on every other house on the block. The decorative items were 2 medium-sized planters and a wind chime Leah bought at a weekend market. And the aggressive behavior, that had to be her calmly showing the police her badge. It was laughably until it wasn't. The letter ended with a warning that further violations could result in escalating fines and a possible mandatory review by the HOA's internal conduct panel. It sounded official, intimidating, threatening even. Leah, ever composed, looked at it like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She spent the next few evenings building a file. Every citation in the letter was photographed, time-stamped, and compared to examples around the neighborhood. She documented other houses with larger lawn decorations, identical doorbell cameras, and multiple cars parked worse than ours. She even printed out HOA guidelines from the neighborhood website and highlighted the vague, subjective language used in the complaint. Then she did something I didn't expect. She sent an email not just to the HOA board, but to every neighbor on the community mailing list. It was professional, respectful, and bulletproof. She explained that she had received a formal complaint from the HOA containing accusations that were either false or selectively enforced. She stated that while she respected community rules, she believed the letter represented a misuse of authority by someone with a personal agenda. She even offered photographic proof and politely requested a public review of how such complaints were processed. She didn't name Karen. She didn't have to. That night, my phone buzzed constantly with replies. One neighbor, Mrs. Chan from 3 doors down, wrote, "About time someone said something. Karen's been after my garden gnome for months. Another added, she took a photo of my recycling bin and reported it for being unsightly. The thread grew rapidly. Dozens of residents came forward with similar stories. Karen had spent the last few years making herself the unofficial sheriff of the street, and nobody had dared to confront her until now. Leah didn't gloat. She just added every news story to her folder. A week later, we were invited to attend the HOA's monthly board meeting. For the first time in its history, it would be held in person in the local community center rather than over Zoom. Leah didn't say much when she got the email, just printed it out, circled the time and date, and added it to the front of her file folder. When we arrived at the community center, the parking lot was nearly full. Inside, folding chairs were lined up in rows, with a long table at the front where the HOA board sat like a panel of judges. Karen was there, sitting in the second row with a thick binder on her lap, lips pursed so tightly they were barely visible. She didn't look at us, but her posture was stiff and electric, like a coil wound too tight. The meeting opened with typical agenda items: budget updates, community park repairs, upcoming holiday events. Then came the item labeled resident complaint review. That was us. The board president, an older man named Ron, who always looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, cleared his throat and said, "We've received multiple concerns from both residents and board members regarding the recent compliance warning sent to the grants at Lot 17. We've also received follow-up evidence questioning the validity of the complaints." Leah stood calmly. She didn't bring her folder up like she was presenting a case. She simply walked to the microphone and spoke like she'd done it 1,000 times before, which, in her line of work, she probably had. "I'm not here to argue," she began. "I'm here to clarify. I respect rules. I follow them. But I also believe in fairness and accountability. When someone uses rules to settle personal scores, it stops being about community and starts becoming control. That's not what this neighborhood should stand for." She then laid out her points. Every accusation, every photo, every inconsistency. She did it with logic, not emotion. She never raised her voice. She never looked at Karen. And by the end of it, even Ron looked uncomfortable. One board member leaned forward. "Ms. Grant, are you implying that someone within the HOA has been selectively targeting you?" Leah replied, "I'm not implying anything. I'm showing you patterns. You can draw your own conclusions." The room was quiet. Karen shifted in her seat. Someone near the back whispered something and laughed. Then, as if she couldn't hold it in any longer, Karen stood. "She's manipulating all of you," she snapped. "She's not even really who she says she is. I mean, yes, she showed a badge, but who verifies that?" Ron looked surprised. "That was already confirmed by local law enforcement." "Karen, she could have faked it. People fake things all the time," Karen shouted. "And she's turning this neighborhood against me." "No one needed help with that," someone muttered from the side. Leah didn't flinch. She simply said, "If you believe my credentials are false, I encourage you to report it again. But next time, use the right channels. I'd also remind you that knowingly filing a false report against a federal officer is a crime under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 1001. Karen turned red, not pink, not flushed red. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared, and for a moment it looked like she might say something else. But then she just turned and walked out of the building, binder clutched to her chest. The board didn't even vote. Ron simply said, "The complaint is dismissed, and no further action will be taken." But it wasn't over. That night, Leah got an email from the HOA's legal advisor, requesting a private meeting. Leah wasn't the type to get nervous easily. I'd seen her walk into government buildings with armed security, deal with classified intelligence briefings, and lead operations involving high-risk personnel. But the moment she opened that email from the HOA's legal advisor requesting a confidential sit-down, I saw something flicker across her face. Not fear exactly, but wariness, like someone who just found out the chessboard they were playing on had a second layer underneath. "They want a private meeting," she said, handing me her phone. The message was short and carefully worded. The board's attorney, a woman named Claudia Petwell, requested to meet Leah in person to review the events of the past few weeks and discuss any potential legal exposure on behalf of the HOA. Legal exposure. That's when I knew this was bigger than just Karen being a busybody. This wasn't a nosy neighbor problem anymore. It was a legal problem. For them, we agreed to meet at Claudia's office the next afternoon. It was a sleek brick building near the courthouse downtown, the kind of place that handled wills, real estate contracts, and small civil suits. When we arrived, the receptionist greeted us like she'd been expecting a celebrity. "Mrs. Grant, please come in. Miss Penwell is waiting." Inside, Claudia stood and offered a firm handshake. She was in her late 40s, sharp blazer, smart glasses, and the kind of voice that made you feel like she knew exactly how long your silence could last before it became uncomfortable. She gestured toward two chairs and got straight to the point. "First, let me be clear, we are not accusing you of any wrongdoing," she said, "but we are currently reviewing the HOA's procedures and decision-making processes in light of recent complaints." Leah gave her a small nod. "That's appreciated." Claudia tapped a folder in front of her. The situation with Ms. Gilnar has brought up some serious concerns. It appears she may have been using her unofficial influence to push false complaints through the board system. That's not just unethical, it could create liability for the entire HOA. I sat back, stunned. This woman wasn't sugarcoating anything. She had clearly done her homework. She doesn't hold a real position in the HOA, Leah asked. She's on a subcommittee, technically, but it's advisory only. No actual power. She's been presenting herself as compliance chair, but that's not a recognized role. She made it up years ago and no one challenged her. I couldn't believe it. All the threatening letters, the measuring of trash bins, the inspections, it was all smoke. Karen had built an entire imaginary empire out of nothing, and somehow people just went along with it. No one questioned it because she acted like she belonged in charge, and now she was dragging the HOA into real legal risk because she pushed it too far with the wrong person. What kind of legal exposure are we talking about? Leah asked. Claudia looked directly at her. Well, the false police report alone could qualify as defamation, especially if it caused damage to your professional reputation. And if any HOA communications included or endorsed her false claims, that becomes a liability issue. Leah didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked, is the board prepared to deal with this internally, or are you hoping I won't take it further? Claudia was smart enough not to dodge. We'd like to resolve this amicably, but I want to assure you we are taking it seriously. Ms. Gellner has already been suspended from all HOA-related activity pending review. That explained Karen's sudden disappearance from patrol duty. I wondered if she was pacing her living room right now, watching our house from behind a curtain, still trying to find a way to regain control. Leah nodded slowly. I'll hold off on filing anything formal for now, but I want it in writing. Acknowledgement that the complaint was baseless and that the HOA is distancing itself from her actions. You'll have it by tomorrow, Claudia said without hesitation. We left the office feeling like something had finally shifted. For the first time, it wasn't us being questioned, it was Karen. And not just by neighbors whispering behind hedges, but by people with real authority. That evening, as we sat out on our porch again, sipping drinks and watching the sun drop behind the rooftops, we saw something we never thought we'd see. Karen's for sale sign going up in her yard. It was surreal. 2 real estate agents pulled up in matching SUVs, placed the sign neatly on her pristine lawn, and walked into the house without so much as a knock. We didn't see Karen, not a flicker of movement behind her windows, not even her little dog barking at the commotion. Just silence. She's really leaving, I said, almost in disbelief. Leah tilted her head. She's not the type to admit defeat. Either the board pushed her, or she's planning to sue someone and thinks this helps her case, or both. I added. The next morning, a typed letter arrived on our porch, not mailed, not emailed, but hand-delivered in a sealed envelope with no return name. Inside was a single paragraph from the HOA board, signed by Ron, the president. It officially acknowledged that the compliance violations issued against us had been based on unverified information, and were now fully dismissed and expunged from record. There was no apology, but the language was clear. They wanted this done and buried. Leah folded the letter and slipped it into a folder. That'll do, but of course, with someone like Karen, it's never really over. 2 days later, Leah received an odd email from a Gmail account she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You're not who you say you are." Inside was a short, spiteful message. "You may have fooled the board, but I know what you really are. You lied, and you'll slip up eventually. People like you always do. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last." There was no name, no signature, but we both knew who it was. Leah exhaled deeply. She's rattled. I looked at her carefully. "Are you going to respond?" "No," she said. "She wants me to. That's the trap." Instead, Leah forwarded the email to Claudia and added a note. "If she contacts me again, this becomes harassment. I'll file a cease and desist." Claudia replied within minutes. "Understood. I'll notify the board." What amazed me most through all of this was Leah's restraint. She could have gone full throttle, filed formal complaints, gone public, even brought in her agency's legal team. But she didn't want to crush Karen. She wanted to expose the pattern. She wanted the community to see what had been happening in plain sight. And now, they did. Neighbors who once nodded politely from their porches now came over to chat. One man, a retired Army colonel named Miles, told us, "I've lived here 12 years. That woman tried to fine me for putting a flagpole on my lawn. She said it violated aesthetic harmony. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her." Another neighbor, Sandra, confided that Karen once told her to remove a child's wheelchair ramp from her front door because it clashed with the neighborhood's traditional look. My stomach turned hearing that. Karen wasn't just a control freak, she was cruel. By the weekend, Karen's moving truck had arrived. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't glare at us, didn't mutter threats, didn't even look in our direction. Her house was emptied in hours, and by sunset, her car was gone. Leah watched through the window, arms crossed. "It's not about winning," she said softly. "It's about holding the line." And she had. Not with shouting or revenge, but with truth. and unshakable confidence in who she was. Karen had thrown everything at her lies police, the HOA, but in the end, all she did was reveal her own weakness. Because when you try to fake power, it only works until you run into someone who doesn't have to pretend. And Leah never had to pretend. After Karen moved out, the neighborhood changed, but not in the loud, dramatic way you'd expect when a long-time self-appointed enforcer vanishes. It changed subtly, like a fog lifting. It wasn't that people suddenly became best friends or that fences came down and block parties sprung up overnight. It was quieter than that, more human. The way people lingered a little longer outside when walking their dogs. The way porch lights stayed on later, as if folks finally felt like they could breathe again. As if they no longer had to look over their shoulders just to plant a flower or hang a seasonal wreath. It didn't happen all at once, but the air was different. Even Leah noticed it, and she wasn't one to overanalyze social dynamics. "You feel that?" she said one evening, as we sipped coffee on our front steps. I nodded. It's like everyone just exhaled. The first real sign came from the Harpers, an older couple who lived 2 houses down. Mr. Harper was a retired librarian, always quiet, always kind, and his wife June loved gardening more than anything else. For years, Karen had hounded June about her non-native plants, claiming her wildflowers violated the HOA aesthetic guidelines. I remember seeing June pull up her favorite flower bed once, tears in her eyes. That was about a year before we moved in. But a week after Karen's departure, June was back outside with gardening gloves and a tray of colorful perennials. She smiled and waved to us, and Leah walked over and offered to help. They spent 2 hours chatting and planting, laughing like they'd known each other for years. That single afternoon told me more than any meeting or letter ever could. June wasn't just planting flowers, she was reclaiming space, her own space. Other neighbors followed suit in their own quiet ways. Kids who had been scolded for skateboarding too loudly began rolling through the sidewalks again. Someone put up string lights across their porch. A young couple finally painted their door a bright blue, a color Karen had once sent them a letter about, saying it clashed with the neutral palette of the community. Suddenly, people weren't just living here, they were living here. The most surprising thing, the HOA board started acting normal, practical. Ron, the president, sent out an updated community newsletter the following month, and for the first time, it included words like flexibility, feedback, and even neighbor input. They announced a new open discussion session before each board meeting and encouraged residents to share concerns in person. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Claudia, the HOA's legal advisor, even reached out to Leah to thank her again for the professionalism she'd shown during the whole ordeal. "You didn't just protect yourself," she said in the email. "You reminded this community what leadership actually looks like." Leah showed me the message and shrugged. I didn't lead anything. I just refused to back down. But 2 others, she had. Slowly, people began treating Leah like the unofficial problem solver of the neighborhood. It wasn't that she asked for IT people, just gravitated toward her. They trusted her. One weekend, a neighbor named Miguel stopped by and asked if she'd be willing to look over a letter he received from the HOA about building a small shed. "You've got the eagle eye," he joked. "If they try anything shady, I know you'll spot it." Leah chuckled, but agreed to help. Then came the young mom down the street, whose autistic son was being pressured to play inside because his sensory swing in the yard was distracting. Leah didn't just write a letter for her, invited her and her son over for lemonade, and gave her the name of a civil rights attorney she knew through work. One by one, people realized that Leah wasn't just the woman with the bad, she was the woman who stood up when it mattered. And then, unexpectedly, the board made it official. A month after Karen's departure, Ron knocked on our door. He looked sheepish, holding a clipboard and sweating through his shirt. "Sorry to drop by like this," he said. "I was wondering, would Leah be open to joining the HOA board? We've got an open seat." Leah nearly choked on her coffee. "You're asking me to be on the board? We need someone like you," he said. "Someone who keeps things grounded. Someone people respect." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. "Let me think about it," was all she said. That night, as we sat in the living room, she stared out the window for a long time. "I didn't come here to be a leader," she said finally. "I just wanted a quiet life, but maybe that's the point." I leaned over. "You think if you don't step up, someone like Karen might again?" She gave a tired smile. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." "So," she said yes. Her first board meeting as a new member was packed, more residents than I'd ever seen show up. Some came out of curiosity, others came to see if Leah would be different than the people before her. She didn't talk much, but when she did, people listened. She wasn't about rules for the sake of rules. She was about fairness, context, and keeping things in perspective. One resident, a young man named Trevor, had been fined $150 for putting up a temporary tent in his driveway for his daughter's birthday. Leah asked a simple question. "Did anyone complain?" "No," Trevor said. "Everyone actually showed up. Even the board treasurer was there." "Then the tent wasn't a problem," she replied. "The fine is dismissed." The motion passed unanimously. It wasn't long before the HOA bylaws were revised. Not drastically, just enough to remove vague language that people like Karen had abused for years. Aesthetic compliance became safety and structure standards. Neighbor disturbance became documented nuisance activity. Leah pushed for a requirement that all complaints had to be submitted in writing and reviewed by at least 2 board members before action was taken. That alone stopped a dozen future Karen types in their tracks. But there was one moment that stood out most. A few weeks into her role, Leah got a call from Claudia, who informed her that Karen had filed a formal complaint with a nearby civil mediation board, claiming she had been harassed and forced out of her home. She accused Leah of the board, and even the legal advisor, of orchestrating a smear campaign to publicly discredit her. Leah didn't flinch. Let her file. I have a timeline, emails, and a copy of every letter she ever sent me. The truth. Doesn't need to panic. But what surprised us most was what happened after that. The mediation board dismissed Karen's complaint within a week, but not before they reached out to a few residents for context. What they got was a wave of written statements from neighbors, people Karen had harassed, intimidated, or silenced over the years. Instead of backing her, they finally told the truth. Mrs. Chan, the Harpers, Sandra, Miguel, even the young mum, with the sensory swing, they all stood up. In the end, Karen didn't just lose her fight, she lost her legacy. The woman who once acted like the queen of the neighborhood became a cautionary tale. And Leah, she didn't become the new queen, she became something far better. She became the neighbor everyone hoped to have, the kind who didn't bark rules, but who listened, the kind who reminded people what community actually meant, and more importantly, the kind who proved that real authority isn't loud, flashy, or controlling. It's steady, quiet, earned. One night, months after everything had settled, Leah looked around at the freshly blooming gardens, the blue doors, the string lights dancing on porches, and smiled. "This is what we came here for," she said. And for the first time since we moved in, I believed her. We weren't just living in a neighborhood anymore, we were part of a community. The silence that settled over the HOA boardroom after my wife's badge hit the table was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Even the walls seemed to lean in, straining to listen to what would come next. Karen's expression twisted from superiority to confusion, then full-blown panic. She took a step back as if the badge itself had burned her. I didn't know," Karen stammered. "I didn't realize she was actually a federal agent." My wife said, her voice calm but steely. "That's because you didn't bother to ask. You assumed you're judged. And then you lied to the police about it." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The rest of the board sat in stunned silence. Mr. Thompson, the HOA treasurer, cleared his throat awkwardly and pushed his glasses up his nose, pretending to flip through a file he wasn't even reading. Mrs. Granger, who'd been Karen's most vocal supporter just a few days ago, suddenly found the pattern on the floor very interesting. "You filed a false police report," I said quietly. "That's a federal crime when it involves obstructing the duties of an agent. And let me guess, your phone call to the precinct recorded." My wife pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Karen's voice crackled out, loud and unmistakable. "She's pretending to be an officer. She's wearing a fake badge. I want her arrested now." My wife stopped the recording and looked straight at her. "That's you making a knowingly false accusation about a federal employee on duty. That's obstruction. Karen, you didn't just stick your nose where it doesn't belong. You committed a crime." Karen's knees wobbled slightly, and she gripped the back of her chair like a lifeline. The arrogance she had worn like armor for so long now looked like a costume. She thin and ridiculous. I didn't mean any harm. I just thought," she started. "No, you didn't think," my wife cut in. "You saw a woman in uniform that you didn't recognize. Instead of asking questions, you jumped to conclusions and treated her like a criminal. You tried to get her arrested, knowing full well you had no proof." What happens now?" Karen asked, barely above a whisper. My wife leaned forward. "We're pressing charges. And since this is an HOA matter too, we're also filing an internal misconduct complaint with the county housing board. That little seat of yours, it's gone." Karen's knees finally gave way and she dropped into the chair behind her, shell-shocked and silent. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Within a week, Karen was suspended from the HOA board pending a full investigation. The county board launched their own inquiry, and several residents who had stayed quiet out of fear now came forward with their own complaints about her harassment, her intimidation tactics, and her discriminatory behavior. The floodgates opened. Meanwhile, the local police department issued a formal apology to my wife for the initial confrontation. The 2 officers who showed up that day without verifying the situation were placed on leave and retrained. The officer who'd tried to cuff my wife was reassigned to desk duty pending review. The department couldn't afford bad PR over this. Our neighbors, most of whom had stayed silent for years under Karen's reign, finally began to speak up. The silence that used to follow her footsteps was replaced with door-to-door conversations, petitions, and quiet resolve. The fear had lifted. Something had shifted. One evening, about 2 weeks after everything came crashing down, we stood on our porch watching the sun dip below the trees. The air felt lighter. No Karen driving past, slowly, glaring at us. No HOA notices taped to our door. Just the chirping of crickets and the soft breeze rolling through the yard. "I still can't believe it," I said, slipping an arm around my wife's shoulders. All those months of her poking around, acting like she ran the world, and now she ran into someone who wouldn't back down. My wife replied, "Bullies only have power when people stay quiet. Do you think she'll go to jail? Maybe, maybe not. But she'll definitely never have power here again. That's enough." For me, I looked at her, proud and grateful. "You could have just let it go." "I don't let injustice slide," she said, smiling. "And I definitely don't let someone lie to the police and get away with it." The next HOA election rolled around, and for the first time in over a decade, Karen wasn't even on the ballot. The new candidates were younger, more diverse, and focused on actual community improvement, not control. I even attended a couple of meetings, and for once, they weren't tense or filled with whispering neighbors looking over their shoulders. One day, we ran into Karen at the local grocery store. She was alone, looking worn out and older than she had just a month earlier. No makeup, no blazer, no air of superiority. She saw us, hesitated, and then turned down another aisle. My wife didn't even flinch. She just kept walking, cool as ever. Back home, I opened the mailbox to find an official envelope from the county board. Inside was a copy of their final report. Karen had been permanently removed from her position, banned from running for any HOA seat in the future, and fined for several violations, including misuse of authority and harassment. It was over that evening. I framed the letter and hung it in my garage above the tool bench, not out of spite but as a reminder that standing up matters, that silence enables people like Karen, but one voice, especially one backed by truth and justice, can change everything. That night, as we sat under the stars with 2 glasses of tea and the soft hum of crickets, I smiled to myself. "Impersonating an officer, huh?" I said, chuckling. She really had no idea who she was messing with. My wife laughed. "She picked the wrong house. And the wrong wife." "Bright reality," I said, raising my glass. "There's no brighter justice than the truth." Thank you for watching Bright Reality. For more powerful real-life stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.